For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Or welcome, if it's your first time. I am your host, Jade Black, and today I'm talking about the part of the Full House that has been one of the hardest to concept. This is the tricks of the Full House. And a quick recap for anyone who hasn't watched the Full House introduction episode, or it's been a while since you have. The tricks are the different tenses, different POVs, different POV counts, all of that. And this ties in very closely to Suits as well, which are the different sort of genre categorizations of the Full House, though I'll talk about that a bit more later. For the sake of being comprehensive, I'm going to talk about what is and isn't included in the trick list in the Full House. So firstly, you have different core types of POV, so that's first person versus third person. Second person I've not included because that's much more of a game design thing for me rather than a literature thing, and that might be just me as a reader. It might just depend on what I've read as to I haven't really come across that. But when approaching story in a game design perspective, that's always been a very second person endeavour to me. That's something quite separate. So that's just something I feel very differently about, and an entirely different skill set in many a way to try and tackle, and I don't feel that it aligns very well with the Full House, so I've not included that. In terms of core tenses, there is past tense and present tense. Future tense, again, is not included. This is something that I've actually never seen published. Again, this might just be me. As far as I'm aware, this is something that only really comes up in highly experimental literature, which is not something I'm looking to do at the moment. That might change in the future, but as of 2025, I don't have plans to do that. There's also the sort of core POV count. So this is single POV, dual POV, and multi-POV. And this is an area I have dabbled in the most so far. I have touched on all three of these, though the latter two not very much. And then when you talk about third person, this is a bit of the elephant in the room. There is a difference, and this is sort of not properly listed on the Full House, but it is there. It's sort of in a liminal fringe space, that there is a difference between third person closed, third person limited, and third person omni, and you get to the point where it's very obvious I'm very ignorant about all of this, because I feel reasonably confident saying that there are probably other forms of third-person POV as well that I'm just not really aware of, and I'm not so hot on the differences between close, limited, and omni. But this is just because I have hardly written third-person at all. And, I've read a fair bit of third-person, of course, but when I'm reading, I just don't think about things like that in the same way. Obviously, I'm aware when I'm reading that, oh, this is a different form of third person to this other form I've read. It's especially obvious in anthologies when different people prefer different styles. I'm like, oh yeah, this is clearly different to this one, but I don't generally try to put a name on which one is which, because while I'm reading, I'm just not that bothered about it. Like, there are some I definitely prefer, which I believe would be third person close. Not a surprise. But I'm never quite sure where the line is. That is something I'm looking into properly learning, when I get properly into third person, because the point of the full house is to be able not only to do all of these things and to have done all of these things, but to be able to do them and to have done them well. It's not just, okay, I've written a third person Omni story and it's executed horribly, but it's done. It's writing a third person Omni story that's readable and also entertaining and good. So to get a full list of the tricks that are in the Full House, because it's sort of a bit here, a bit there, and a bit everywhere. So in total that's 22. And that's kind of a lot. And the vast majority of those are not first person. The vast majority of those are the various different types of third person. So yeah, I kind of have a lot of work to do, given that I've only touched on 3. And with one of those that is touched on. Well, I've sort of touched on the first pass single, but as it stands, what I find when I write third person is that I really, really struggle with voicing, because I have not really ever written third regularly. I've hardly touched on it at all, so that's part of the nature of learning that. So I'm never really sure whether I'm writing close, limited, or omni, and to be honest, I think I probably sort of switch at different points in the first draft, and a lot of the editing is going to be making that consistent and making that right for the genre and for the story. So yeah, that's where it gets particularly tricky for me with the third person, is the sort of sub-tricks there. And what's also tricky about all of these, different types of third person, that's like 18 different types of third person, is where on earth you actually fit those in. I mean, if you talk about third present at all, that's incredibly hard to try and place, because that's such a weird tense and POV combination. I do have some way of getting a sort of mass hit on tricks, and this is mainly the Unheard Ones, where this is a short story collection that I have concepted, and a lot of this is going to be in the various different forms of first person, but that's probably where I'm going to end up touching on a bit of first past, which is actually a tense POV combination I really like. I really like first person past tense. I've just never found a place to use it yet. The Unheard Ones is probably where that's going to come in. That's going to have a few different tricks to it. But also, I've talked about this before on the podcast, and honestly kind of on social media as well. You've probably seen me talk about this at some point. The tense and POV count and all this stuff is incredibly genre dependent to me. It really depends what genre you're writing as to what will work best, and this is why I spend so much time in first person present tense, because I wholeheartedly believe that is the single best tense and POV combination for thriller. If I didn't think that, that isn't how I'd write them. The Determined Ones would not be written that way if I didn't think it was the best way to do it. And, I spend the majority of my time writing thrillers. That is the Determined Ones, that is my novels are thrillers, for the vast majority of the time, and for future concepts I'm not even sure what genre they are, so, we'll see. We'll get to that when we get there, but they'll almost definitely be in first present, because that works so broadly across different genres. I think it works really well for horror as well, because it's much more immersive in something horrific. I think it works really well for noir as well. I mean, that's just sort of thriller's sad cousin. I use that sort of phrasing all the time because it's true. So what works for thriller works for noir. I mean, I don't really feel there's a genre where first person present doesn't work. I mean, that's part of just writing craft, that really any tense and POV should be able to work in any genre, but it's about what works best. You know, what's the best fit. So you could write a third person present tense thriller, but I would feel that it would probably work better in first person. And, you know, this is incredibly subjective, so, you know, take all of this with a pinch of salt, but this is my full house. This is how I view these projects. This is about what I want to write, how I want to write these things. So yeah. First person past tense, despite being a POV I like a lot, I just really don't know what to do with. Like, I don't know how to approach that. I don't know what genre would work really well with that. I think thriller is an obvious shout. I think a particular type of thriller could work really well in past tense, and I think horror would be the other obvious shout. I think they could both work well in past tense. I would actually lean more towards something like litfic here. A first person past tense litfic, I think, could be really interesting. And I quite like the idea of playing with that, particularly when it comes to first past multi or first past dual. I think that could be a really nice way of approaching that. But I'm less sure about that. Like, it works quite well in dark lit, but it's trying to find the atmosphere of a dark lit story that doesn't cry out for present tense. So noir might not be a bad bet either, and yeah, I am kind of spitballing this on the fly, if you couldn't tell. A third person past, I mean, this isn't difficult, really. I mean, this is basically just all of my jokers. This is, you know, any kind of fantasy is just sort of defaults to third person past, and I do actually think there's a pretty good reason for this. I think first person fantasy is really, really cool, but depending on the type of fantasy you're writing, third person is actually the way to go. So if you're writing epic fantasy, the stuff that has a lot of world building and therefore a lot of necessary description of magic and stuff like that, because there are fewer grounding points that we can really lean on, so you just end up with heavier description. I think third person is a better vehicle for that. And, you know, you can make that single, dual, or multi very easily in fantasy. Although you do end up running into longer projects with the more POVs you have, and that's not necessarily what I want, because a lot of this experimentation is in novelette form. I try not to let this stuff get too long because I got deadlines, much as anything, and I really like writing novelettes. They're a lot of fun. I've talked about this many a time. I'm sure I'll talk about it many a time again, but I'll keep it brief for now. But yeah, third person past, outside of fantasy, as a joker pack, that's where it gets a little tricky. I mean, litfic, again, is an easy place to put that. Otherwise, alt history might be the one in the quill set that would work. Although alt history is a slightly tenuous... It's slightly tenuous to call that a straight genre, but it seems to be accepted that people do, so I'm sort of rolling with that, I guess. But there are so few genres, you know, within the Full House, because the Full House is extremely dark lit dominated. There are very few genres that third person past would be the right choice for. Especially when you're trying to get into closed versus limited versus omni. That's something I don't know that I in particular could really say, oh no, this this particular genre I'll write in omni or limited or close. Because for me, that's not a genre thing. That's a particular story thing. Is actually the vibe of this story, the subject matter of the story, or what I want to draw attention to in this story works best in this particular form of third person, be that limited, omni, or close. I don't think you can necessarily say epic fantasy is always best in omni. I don't think that's true. I think it depends on the epic fantasy, whether what drives it, literally, whether it's plot driven, whether it's character driven, whether it's world driven, something else entirely, as to what will work best there. If it's character driven, chances are it's close, but it would be, I don't think that's a hard and fast rule. I mean, I genuinely just do not know what I'm talking about here. I am not very familiar with the different types of third, where the line is, and I certainly haven't written them consistently, that's for damn sure. So I really just don't know at that point. That's something that I'll almost invariably come back to on this podcast once I have more of that under my belt. Third person present, I think, is probably the single hardest POV and tense combination to try and concept around. At the moment, I do have an extraordinarily vague litfic concept around that, because litfic is often a bit more experimental. So that just kind of seems like the obvious answer that I'm reasonably familiar with and can actually sort of imagine. This is a point where I actually wonder if it would be a good mystery. A third person present mystery might work really, really well. That's the other place I see it. And actually see it quite strongly as well. Not like, oh, maybe third past or history, that's tenuous. But third present mystery, I could see, and I could actually see third present in alt history as well. As soon as I sort of mentioned alt history, I thought, no, third present would be better for that. Because I think there's something very interesting to me about historical fiction written in present tense. I think the vibe of past tense often works really well for his fic, but I just really like the idea of his fic in present tense. And something that just has never really come up, ever, is I've talked a lot about liking litfic, though that's a recent love. I've always really, really loved historical fiction. Like, ever since I was like a wee lass, I love historical fiction. It's another genre I've never really written. It calls to me a bit in a sort of alt history sense, just because I don't want to do a PhD's worth of research for a novelette. That's a bit much. So alt history maybe a little bit more. But yeah, trying to place all these different 22 tricks is actually incredibly difficult, because especially, I mean, trying to get even just a sort of core of third person present, third person single, third person dual, and third person multi, trying to get 3 is not that easy. And then if you wanted to break that down into close, limited, and omni, so third present single close, third present single limited, that gets even harder. And again, as I said, I don't know that that's something you can really plan for. I don't think could, being so heavily a pantser, and absolutely no willing to change that, because heavy plotting was not the right thing for me at all. And when it comes to close, limited, and omni, that's unofficially there for a reason. Because it's so story dependent, yes, I would like to get good at all of those things, but I'm not necessarily bothered about third past single omni and third present multi-omni. So long as I have an omni or two, that's good enough. I don't need all of them. So I more look to a core 12 of first pass single, first pass dual, first pass multi, and just keeping that the same for each. So each first past, first present, third past, third present, they each have 3. And whether it's close limited or omni when it comes to third or something else, that purely depends on the story. If I end up with them all being the same, then, I'm going to end up writing a bit more and trying to do a limited and trying to do an omni, especially because I'll be familiar enough by then with them to do that. But I'm going to need a lot more Joker concepts before I end up doing that. And when it comes to third person, what I have dabbled in is exclusively third past single. For the sake of I'm usually writing present tense single. So trying to keep at least 1 point of consistency just feels like a sensible way to break into writing third person, going straight to multi-POV, going completely off the deep end into a whole ream of stuff I've never done before. Just feels a bit harsh. I don't need to learn all of those things at the same time. So having a grounding point somewhere about not having to worry about multi-POV, because I have done it a subtotal of once in a completed project, and it was incredibly difficult in first person present. And I also wish that more third person stories were single POV, because I think that's an interesting combination that not enough people utilise. The default with third person is multi-POV, and while that can be great, like in my current read Dance of Demons, that's been done really, really well, I just think there should be more experimentation, generally, and I would rather lean towards the more experimental side than the more typical side, just because that's more interesting to me. Like, third pass multi would be fun to try, but that is low down the list of tricks I want to do, because it's more default and it's less interesting because of that. I would love, genuinely, hand on heart, to write a third pass multi-POV epic fantasy just to say I've done it. But before that, I would much rather write and publish my third person past tense single POV epic fantasy, because I actually really like how that's going. That is Hypoxemia, and I really love how that's going. And if you want to get semi-live updates on my adventures in that or whatever other side project I have going on at the time, because by the time this is uploaded it might well be drafted, I don't know. Twitter's the place to do that. I do writing updates just about every morning where you can see what I'm working on, what my progress is. So on Twitter I am JadeBlack21. I also host the monthly Thrills prompts on there. If you have been enjoying the podcast and you want to know what the next episode is, whether it's about the Full House or something else entirely, Instagram is the place for that, because at some point I have to decide what the episode of the week is going to be. You also get maybe the odd bit of podcast bonus content on there, or just whatever else I'm doing on Instagram. I never really know what I'm doing on there. I'm Jade_Black21 on Instagram. I'm also Jade_Black21 on Pinterest, and this is the place I'm second most active. This is my art place. There are a lot of drawings that are exclusive on there, to exclusive world building stuff as well, so you can see what the places I write about sort of look like. There's a whole bank of snippets from Mr. Nekagami, a whole load of art around Mr. Nekagami. It's very cool. Pinterest, Jade_Black21. I also exist, officially, on Blue Sky, but I have not made time for game dev in a while. You can follow me on there if you want for the once in a blue moon I'm on there. I'm jblack21. And I've touched on my published works a bit in this episode, though not that much, but I do have 3 out, and more on the way. So my novel, Miss Nakagami, is out now. That is a first-person present single POV. 2 published novelettes are Count the Stars and Charcoal Rain in the Cozy-ish and Dream Court anthologies, respectively. Count the Stars is first-person single, Charcoal Rain is first-person dual. And links to all of that, social media and publications, will be in the description. And if you are published, or well on the way, please do get in touch. I would love to interview you and be part of your journey. My email is on the screen. Please check the list of things in the description first. It just makes things a whole lot easier to streamline and to see if this podcast is the right fit for you or not. Indie and self-pub writers, you are the people I want to hear from the most. Tradpub, I will consider you. From now on, I am prioritising indie dark lit because there are so few spaces available and open to indie dark lit. So I'm trying to be the change I want to see. And for what it's worth, no, this does not include dark fantasy. But until next time, you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like, or commenting, or subscribing. It really does help the channel a lot. All music is done by me. Copyright Jade Black 2025.